We are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies, discussing this all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together?
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan? Welcome back, everyone. I hope the coffee was very good. I'm still Pieter Gaak. I'm a senior technology reporter at Politico. The next hour, we're gonna dive into the very thorny topic of simplification, and things became even more tense last week when talks on how to simplify the EU's AI rules completely collapsed. Total drama. And that package was even only just a starter, because after that we still have to tackle the more difficult topic of addressing the EU's data protection rules. We will talk all about this because there is much to talk about with four esteemed panelists. First, we have Dariusz Standerski, Poland's digital minister. We have Sean Perriman, global head of AI policy at Uber. We have Ichacho Dominguez, policy advisor at European Digital Rights. And we are also joined online by Sergej Lagodinsky, a German European Parliament lawmaker for the Greens. And I want to express my gratitude for him to join, because he's based in the US at the moment, so it's very early there. And I was told he already even went for a run this morning. That's quite impressive. I want to start with you, Sergej, if I am allowed to address you with your first name. So last week, everyone had expected that there would be a deal on the AI Omnibus. And of course, the key part of the AI Omnibus is to delay a key part of the EU's Artificial Intelligence Act. But then we woke up to the news on Wednesday morning, no deal. And many blame Germany for asking an exemption for industrial AI. So we're all very keen to hear, because tomorrow there will be new talks. Yeah, can you give us an overview of what the latest is? Where are we, and are we en route to a deal or not?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for letting me join from Washington. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Just to clarify, I'm a rapporteur of the Legal Affairs Committee on AI Omnibus, and I was watching what was going on in the trilogue. However, I cannot participate because, according to the new rules of procedure, the opinion-making committees are only preparing but not negotiating. Just to be clear and transparent on that. I think what we're seeing here is a meltdown of the original plan, and the meltdown indeed is due to one particular thing. The German government, especially one part of the German government, the German chancellor, not the Social Democrats as far as I understand it, wanted to have an exemption from high-risk standards for industrial AI. And industrial AI thought and defined very broadly. So they proposed the so-called sectorial approach, or the so-called vertical approach. That means, for those who maybe do not follow things in details, whenever you have an AI, for example, in radio industry or in medical device industry, this would kick them out of the scope of AI Act with all the different horizontal rules that we created specifically for AI cases, and would refer everyone to the sectoral regulations, regulations for medical devices or regulations for radio or whatever. And we're saying, where is the simplification here? My committee said in the area of machinery, it's fine and a very limited exception, but everywhere else it would mean basically a loophole, because no other sectoral legislation ever thought about AI Act. So you will have to adjust then in accordance with AI technology. You will have a whole Flickenteppich, as they say in German, the whole mosaic of different sectorial legislations. And in many cases, you will have more than one sectorial legislation that would be would have to apply across different sectors, because some industry applications just touch upon different radio waves and medical devices. I don't know, whatever.
So
whatever you want. So
you argue that that is no real simplification, but you are indicating that there is maybe a deal possible when it's only machinery. Is that what I understood correctly?
Well, this is the matter. I mean, tomorrow the negotiations will start again, and I think it's it's up to the negotiators again to see where they can meet. I'm just saying that in the case of our position of the Legal Affairs Committee, this was machinery. Generally, I don't see any need for any exemptions, but the broad exemption of the whole industrial AI, and this was the point where German government, the German chancellor, basically set the machinery of negotiations and also of Commission in motion to defend this position that is not even shared by the Council. This was the thing that derailed the whole process. And nobody's talking about stop the clock anymore, and nobody's talking about the notifier ban anymore.
I want to talk about that at the moment, because indeed, like the delay of last week, the talks collapsed, are a bit threatening the timeline, because we have a deadline in this file, because normally the high-risk AI rules would kick in this August, and of course the proposal is now to delay that to next December. Minister, I remember that Poland was one of the first countries that really pushed for that delay of the high-risk AI rules. Are you now concerned that because of the talks collapsing last week and the uncertainty at the moment, that timeline to postpone is in danger?
Of course we are concerned, and on the other hand we are much hopeful for tomorrow because the Cyprus presidency proposed 4 options to compromise, and I believe that those options are wise. They are answers for some member states' needs, and I really hope that tomorrow we're gonna reach the deal. Because as Sege said, there's nobody talking about stop the clock anymore, because stop the clock is already agreed, and we have 1 or 2 issues still to negotiate, and I really believe that those proposals brought by the presidency are the final ones. And we have also some lessons learned from this process. The first lesson: if you are a member state and you have some concerns and doubts, tell us before the end of the whole procedure.
Are you saying that Germany took the wrong approach here? That they came too late with her demands?
I believe that the legislative procedure is so long and there is so many levels of this procedure that we should have talked about it earlier. However, we are where we are. Those are lessons learned for the next omnibus, for the digital omnibus. So let's wait for tomorrow. I believe that tomorrow about noon we will know where we are heading. After the Coreper, we will already be waiting for the negotiations with, I believe, the direct and coherent statement by member states articulated by the presidency.
And where does Poland stand itself on the issue of machinery? Can that be exempt of the scope of the AI Act?
As I said, the presidency proposed 4 options. We believe that all the options on the table are very wise, and we are open to every option.
That was not really the question. The question is, can you live with machinery being exempted from the AI Act?
You know, what's the most important about this omnibus? It's to have those dates delayed. That's the first topic. The second topic is to have more time to prepare. For me, it's the worst case scenario is when we will have those obligations already enforced and August the 2nd will pass and we will be not prepared for it as a member states and as companies. So for me, it's not 0-1 decision. That's why we negotiate negotiate, and we will support those proposals made by the Cyprus presidency.
Very good in dancing around the machinery question. I want to turn to civil society. Chacho, you've been, the civil society has been very vocal on this idea that the AI Act has to stay a horizontal law, that you can't just make some carve-outs for some sectors. Can you explain to us a bit why that is so important? Because I feel that maybe if you put this AI require AI requirements under sectoral law, that could work as well, no?
First and foremost, thanks so much for the invitation. I don't represent just the EDRI office, I represent the largest European network of digital rights organizations, experts and individuals. And we've been working on the AI Act before the AI Act existed. And I think something that we always called for, even if we didn't obtain that, was to have a rights-based law. We didn't have that, we had a product safety law, but it at least has some level of fundamental rights protection. That's the AI Act, and that was the idea of the Annex 1. If I'm not mistaken, shifting all of these, or part of it, this is where not even all right with the machinery part, which we think it's a very unfair compromise that is being put on the table just because people need to do the stop the clock and need not to delay the process any longer, which is one of the insufficiencies of the digital omnibus, this fast pace that has forced all co-legislators to draft very provisions that don't bring any kind of legal certainty, but also are not understood and studied in depth, which I'm afraid we are afraid. When you look at the result of it, we are afraid that this is not going to bring legal certainty, and it's also going to undermine the level of data protection. You know, when you move all of these laws from a law that has fundamental rights at its core, even if it's not a fundamental rights law, you already risk losing the protection of fundamental rights, even though, you know, we saw the compromises presented by the Cyprus presidency, and it was this idea that guaranteeing the level of the level of fundamental rights. It's not because it's in the law, it's not because it's black and white that you're not going to guarantee that. You have to go through the standardization process. Anyways, these sectoral laws are really...
You would say that there is some kind of gap in the protection if...
I know, 100%, it's clear, you know, and we know how standardization works, we know who co-ops the process for standardization, and we know that fundamental rights are not the first and foremost priority for this standardization and for these sectoral processes. So yes,
you mentioned legal certainty, and that's of course where I want to bring a company in, because companies, they crave legal certainty. Sean, I want to hear from you. Like, why is it so important that we delay these high-risk AI rules? Why is there a need for companies to really have more time to prepare for that?
Yeah. And for those who didn't hear, I'm Sean Perryman. I'm head of AI policy for Uber globally. I switched with Sergey. He went to DC, and I decided to come to Brussels so that we could swap out balance of power. I think this conversation is very in the weeds at the moment, right? But legal certainty is important so that we are making sure that when we talk about consumer protections or fundamental rights, that we're actually meeting our obligations. And right now, you have the AI Act, you have the Platform Work Directive, you have GDPR. Those are 3 different laws that all touch on automated decision-making and AI in such a way that it's like, which obligation do you want us to meet? And so I think that the AI Omnibus and the Digital Omnibus are welcome efforts. You need more time to make sure that we understand truly what high risk is. But we have to keep in mind, as we're having this conversation right now, the technology is still evolving, right? It's not like it's stopping and waiting for Brussels or anyone else to make these decisions. And so I think this debate is welcomed and important. But what we're ultimately trying to do is make sure that we have some legal certainty.
Okay. The technology is evolving. You said that's interesting, sure. Of course, because what we saw with the AI Act is that after it was adopted in 2023, it was published in the books here in 2024, but already we see indeed the technology taking new steps. For example, something that really popped up after the adoption of the AI Act was AI agents, and that's something where you, Sergey, have really pushed on the question, like, is this now covered by the AI Act? But I want to ask the question a bit more broadly. To what extent do you think that something like the AI Act, which already has to be revised, is really future-proof regulation, and how can you make sure that these types of regulations are indeed, a bit of a flexible framework for a very transformative and evolving technology?
Well, definitely not by reopening it at every occasion possible, and definitely not by talking it down, as, by the way, people like the German digital minister is doing occasionally. I just generally, being here in Washington, talking to people, I have a feeling, one lesson that I'm bringing was we have to stop what I call the tech whining. There are challenges. I know this. I speak to the companies, but these challenges can be mitigated. And we, by, like in any relationship, and trust me, I know this, whining is not sexy. It makes us unattractive for investors because we always say why we are bad. And we always talk about this regulation as the biggest problem. This is not the biggest problem that we have. What we're lacking are three things. Number one, a strategic approach by this commission. And this would, by the way, be future-proof if it is clear what kind of strategy we're driving, not the short-term fixes, but the long-term equipping and enabling of our industry. Number two, talking about financing issues and capital market enabling. And number three, talking about a common market, also in the digital area. And these are much better and much more future-proof approaches. I do think that with AI Act, we have a revolutionary and quite, look at this, zoom out. Look at this globally. People from everywhere in the world are talking about AI Act. This shows that there is an impact that we're having. And yes, it does not substitute the market power of innovation, but talking about innovation versus regulation all the time only makes us weaker. Let's talk about innovation and how regulation can assist and support it. This is what it is about. And AI Act is an example. High-risk based and therefore open for future adjustments. If you go now to sectorial issues, coming back to your first questions, then you are stuck because you will have to address all the sectorial laws every time there is a change in the future.
Yeah,
and
okay, but
this is precisely what we didn't want to have.
Was clear already. But still, indeed, not a lot of, not too much whining about regulation. Yet there are still some files on the table, of course. And after the AI Omnibus, we still have the Digital Omnibus to dig into. Ichacho, I was always told that the AI Omnibus would be the easy one. That's maybe not true, it now appears. The Digital Omnibus, there are a lot of concerns already about some key aspects there, like, for example, the definition of personal data. Can you walk us a bit through the concerns you have on that front, like on that definition of personal data?
Just a definition. So something that we're seeing across the whole of the Digital Omnibus, both the AI Omnibus, is this shift towards self-regulation, towards more declarative, so that companies can say something is happening, so then it's very difficult for regulators or for civil society to go after them. Actually, this is something that we also see with the transparency obligations of the AI Act, and this is something that maybe might be limited tomorrow. But also when it comes to the definition of personal data, the definition of personal data is the entry point to apply GDPR. And, it's been framed as us being absolutists, as everything is personal data, against some pragmatic people, whereas no, we don't say everything is personal data. We say that the definition that we have of personal data is very elegant, brings legal certainty, and has already, been discussed by regulators and by the court. And the court is going to keep intervening when it comes to the definition of personal data, when it comes to new technologies that might have an impact on whether GDPR applies or not. But what we're saying is companies, which is the translation of the definition, of the new definition, even though the Commission says that they're not defining it, will be able to say, no, this is not personal data, hence GDPR doesn't apply. We don't agree with that, of course. I don't want a company to assert that they don't need to be applying GDPR, not just for them, but throughout the whole of the supply chain. And actually, that doesn't bring legal certainty, because you're going to find other companies around it, other companies that have the same data set or some very similar data points. And last but not least, I think we need to understand that when it comes to re-identification and the possibilities of re-identification, these only keep growing, right? We're speaking about singling out. That doesn't have anything to do with me as an individual, me as a name and a surname, but inferences, everything that has to do with the Article 4, but also Recital 26, and being able to understand that all throughout the digital world, except for certain exceptions, most of the data can be inferred and can be used in order to single out somebody.
Sean, I want to bring you in there. If we speak about this definition of personal data and the whole question around that and revising that after X amount of years, how do you look upon that as a company who process also a lot of personal data? Data is, of course, important for also ensuring the security and safety of your passengers. How do you look upon that?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, I don't think GDPR needs to be reopened or revisited. I think that's obvious, right? And I agree with a lot that was said here. Regulation can be good. We do not need to look at this as either regulation or innovation. And I think that binary is often presented and wrong. What we're saying is that we need to have regulation that allows for innovation, that allows for people to understand with legal certainty and consistency. So it's not so much about even how, for me personally, like how you define personal data. It's that it's consistent, that we have consistency and that people can understand that clearly. And so I don't want to get into this false dichotomy that you either have one or the other. And one of the things that we would love to see in the digital omnibus is to make sure that there's not this false dichotomy between privacy and safety, that we understand that you have to sometimes use this data in order to make the rides more safe from an Uber perspective. We look at that in that way. So I think that this conversation, I don't view it as, and I know there may be some out there who are whining, but I look at it as more a proper discourse of making sure that as we have this technology that we are inserting in every single aspect of our economy, that we're doing it in a way that makes sense and that people can actually gain the benefits of the technology while still feeling that their rights are protected.
I want to go a bit beyond what is currently on the table, the AI Omnibus and the Digital Omnibus. Mr. Standeski, I remember that the Polish Council presidency was one of the first to really push for simplification. We now have these two files on the table. Do you think that this is enough, or should we go much deeper, much harder on simplification?
First of all, you are not wrong, because within those two omnibuses, the AI Omnibus is still the easier one. And in terms of the Digital Omnibus, I see that in this case, we may reach the limits of our legal system in the European Union. Because the Digital Omnibus is so packed with so different and distant regulations from each other, that we have our complicated legislative system in the European Union. Within member states, those parts of Digital Omnibus are on many occasions in different ministries. So you have not 27 member states to negotiate within the Council, but you have much more ministries to get along within those member states. Then you have such levels of the procedure. And we saw on the case of the AI Omnibus, which is shorter, which is focused on the one issue, that it makes some difficulties. And I believe that within our legislative procedure, that's all we've got. And I believe that those omnibuses, not only digital, but also in other spheres of our daily life, like environmental omnibus or agricultural omnibus, we shall start the discussion about the very foundation of our legislative procedure, about legislative initiatives. Maybe the election of 2029 should be about how we should rewrite this procedure. For example, to give the European Parliament...
Only at the EU level, or are you also saying that we should maybe tackle first the fragmentation of regulators at the national level in order to, for example, adopt the Digital Omnibus?
It doesn't matter, because what's the main difficulty when we are talking about opening some files? Because we know that when we open it, it will last a year or two to close it after complicated trilogues. I believe that we need to have some amendments to our procedure. First of all, the European Parliament should have the legislative initiative. Second, ministers, plenipotentiary of government should be in the room, because as we saw last week, after trilogues failed, attachés from member states needed to wait for the instructions from the capitals. I believe that ministers should be in the room much more frequently than nowadays, because, for example, the Digital Council, the DTE Council, is only once per semester. So it's not the way how you should write laws. Without systemic changes, we still be blocked by those procedures telling about different omnibuses. And yeah, I agree that we need to have more such deregulation, to be honest, in the European Union. We had the digital fitness check.
I see someone at the other side widening your eyes. More deregulation. What do you make of that?
Of course, because...
I asked a question there. What do you make of more deregulation?
No, I don't think we need more. At first, this is very funny because the Digital Omnibus is the 7th omnibus. We're promised new omnibuses every week. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to sleep at some point, but we were promised this was the only one, you know. And we were promised it was simplification, not deregulation. You know, the Commission was very shy about using the word, and still now they will say it doesn't touch the level of data protection. What's the level of fundamental rights? What's the evidence? There's no evidence. What's the impact assessment? There's no impact assessment. Everything is fast-paced. Everything is presented in a package deal. Thanks so much, Minister, because you explain perfectly how, you know, you bring this nice package deal in the case of the data omnibus with the GDPR, with the privacy, with the data key, which is 3 laws that you know, and all of it needs to be, you know, done very fast, because we've seen that with the AI omnibus, which was, you know, the speed of the process with people who are already dealing with omnibuses when it comes to the perm reps. It's amazing. When it comes to the data omnibus, it's going to be slower, but still it's a sizable package. So I think it just takes time. But we're speaking, and you use the perfect word. What does deregulation mean? Deregulation means undermining the fundamental rights of the people in the European Union, especially of the most marginalized communities, and all of it with the due process. I don't know what you mean. Maybe Peter wants to ask you what you mean specifically by changing the process. But we're looking at a process that is not democratic. Actually, when it looks to the role and to the council, you know, they have to accept this package deal. They have very limited opportunities, and when they do, it's a Pandora's box, because again, we're proposing to add articles that were not in the first proposal that might also don't have an impact assessment and don't have evidence.
A quick, because I was seeing that you wanted to do rebuke on this.
Yeah. Because, for example, in our member states, we've done, not only in Poland but also in member states, many waves of deregulation because of new technological possibilities. Because, for example, when I have automated procedure of our tax declarations, I do not need to have 5 obligations by companies. I have only 1 obligation, and all data is automatically processed by the government. And from December this year, we're going to have EUD wallets. Next year, probably we're going to have business wallets. It means that within the 1 obligation, I can put any info and any compliance obligations that I had within 10 obligations in the current law. That's the regulation, what I mean. And what I mean is that we can have the same level of consumer and citizen rights by the less procedures because of the new technologies. We still have 19th century procedures with the 21st century technology. And one point, why I mean that nowadays procedure within the European Union needs to be fixed. In national parliaments, we pass much more law than within the European on the European level. But we do it quicker, and we need to rethink why.
I'm going to cut this off, or otherwise we're close to a treaty change here. I want to bring in Sergey again, because like what you mentioned on the fragmentation at the national level is something that I found interesting. There are a lot of regulations, a lot of authorities at the national level. Sergey, I know that you've been pushing for this idea of a single digital regulator. Is that something that can be like the next step of simplification, that you have a clearer view on the national level or at the EU level who as a company you should address when you have questions about a certain regulation?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think we should be talking and addressing the issues of the digital governance, the digital regulation governance in the European Union. And Minister, I am very sympathetic with most of you said, but I don't think it's about rewriting laws. It's about streamlining the enforcement. And this is where I think we all meet. Look at GDPR. I don't think we have to reopen GDPR. We have to streamline the enforcement and implementation procedure of GDPR so that in Germany we don't have 16 plus at least one, and probably in every company, one additional interpreter of the laws. But and Peter, you probably heard this from me already. I call it kind of the Kissinger moment of our digital economy. We need this proverbial Kissinger one number where you can call. He talked about foreign policy then, now we're talking about digital policy. One number in Brussels where companies can dial and can know what kind of laws and how they should be applying. And yes, digital business wallet is something that could contribute to that as well. All of this can and should be addressed, I think, during the fitness check of the Commission that is being prepared. And I would like to emphasize this, that the digital fitness check is a different procedure, a procedure with impact assessment. It's a normal legislative procedure. Be my guest. Let's do strategic and experimental there. And this would enable, kind of be a strategic streamlining. And then we need, in addition to that, strategic enabling. And this is the packages that we should talk about how much money and how the Commission should take in order to bolster and to support our digital growth.
Sean, do you know who to call in Brussels if you want to? Is there like one?
I actually call Sophie in the crowd here in Brussels, but I'm sure she would figure that out. I don't believe we have a central line, but would welcome such a line.
Yeah, because you already mentioned, like, as Uber, you also have to deal with more sectoral laws, like for example the Platform Work Directive, which focuses really on gig workers, but also has a provision on automated decision making. So can you make sense of it all when it all comes together? The interplay between these laws, or is that something that should be addressed in the digital fitness check, like the wider interplay of this all?
Yeah, I think absolutely we need to address the interplay between these three. With the Platform Work Directive, specifically Section 3 of that, we're trying to understand
it's the automated decision making.
Automated decision making, how that interplays with GDPR and the AI Act. So I think that would absolutely be welcome in the digital fitness.
If we then speak about the digital fitness check, you said like we don't need more undemocratic deregulation, but and I'm maybe gonna put you in a tough spot at the moment. Can you think about simplification that really works both for companies and for then still protects citizens in the digital fitness check?
I first want to plus one this idea that we should have been looking at enforcement for 2 years. This is why this digital omnibus is also crazy when it comes to the process, when it comes to the content, but also because we're not looking at what really matters, right? And this is what companies have been asking for, right? How does the law need to be enforced when it comes to harmonization, when it comes to regulators? I think, there's a conversation that we need to have about centralizing governments or unifying governments. When it comes to DPAs and when it comes to GDPR, independence is in the charter, so I don't want to reopen the charter, not to give people any ideas. But yeah, of course, there's a way to do simplification, and as you said, simplification that works for everybody, because this is one of the questions with the digital omnibus: simplification for whom? Because this is mainly helping big tech companies that are already the data empires and that can navigate legal uncertainty. Actually, you have some examples of this simplification in the digital omnibus. For example, there's this Article 35, which is data protection impact assessments, are harmonizing that, so that there's a EU-wide definition of whitelist of the high-risk activities and high-risk processing activities. And there's the other example, which is my favorite, if I may, which is privacy signals, automated signals. I know that this looks like hell for some companies because they know that they are afraid that people are going to refuse all, but actually now people refuse all result because they hate the cookies. All of us hate the cookies. I'm not going to do a poll, but I know we do. And this is why we refuse all, because we have all of this consent bundled, and because we don't see any possibility of consenting to just one processing operation, consenting to just Uber. I want to consent Uber processing my data and not the others, whereas with automated signal, privacy signals, I will be able to refuse some of it. I will be able to accept and consent to some of them. And this is simplification amazingly for all of us, for companies that don't have to depend on these consent management platforms, on the companies that design the cookies and do that in a very, very shy way. And actually from the small and medium companies that are actually the ones who should benefit from the digital omnibus and from this new wave of regulation, or not deregulation, a new way of looking at and now that have to depend now on the big tech that are holding all of the data also through the cookies, right?
Yeah, I want to return what you said at the beginning. The problem is maybe not the rulebooks, but maybe the enforcement. If we then look at on the ground, how is that happening in Poland? And do you agree that maybe we should first talk about enforcement, simplifying that rather than simplifying the rulebooks?
You know, I believe that this is the false alternative, as the same what Sergey mentioned. It's not about regulation or innovation, and again, it's not to choose from to regulate or to enforce. So I believe that we need to have three streamlines. First, how to wisely regulate. Second, how to boost innovation through strategies like AI apply strategy or infrastructure investments all across the European Union. And third, how to streamline the enforcement, because I also agree that the enforcement should be better in such way that those infringement procedures should be faster, and also on the member states level, we should harmonize those regulations together. As Polish presidency, we started workshops with other member states how to implement the AI Act together, and I believe that's also the next chapter of the systemic discussion. Maybe we should have the platform for member states to write their local implementations together, to have more and more procedures common for the European Union, because when we do not have the single regulator, as Sergey mentioned, we should have at least common and single procedures in terms of more and more obligations within the AI Act. And I believe the AI Act is the best example because new technologies demand the most of it in terms of common procedures.
If we speak about infringement procedures, is Poland up to speed with appointing all its authorities, DSA authority, AI Act authority?
No, we've picked our DSA authority, our coordinator. Some regulations are going on after Mr. President has vetoed it. However, we have Digital Services Coordinator as our electronic communication office.
What's the state there of the Digital Service Act coordinator? Is it still vetoed? Is it still blocked?
We have designated by the government, and some of competences are under the way after the first veto.
Okay. I still wanted to come back on something that if you engage with regulators in different EU countries, you have teams all over Europe, is it for you currently clear, as you said, what the procedure is? Is there like one single procedure, or is it just too scattered, too fragmented, too unclear what is expected from you as a company?
I think at the moment it's unclear, right? If we're looking at specifically the AI Act and how we think about high risk, right? That's what we're waiting for, with some certainty with the AI Digital Omnibus. So I think that's what we're saying. We need this delay so we can understand that. But at the moment, yes, I think it's unclear for everyone until we get that sort of guidance. So I think there's definitely room for improvement on how we think about enforcement and how we think about providing guidance for companies. We operate in 24 EU countries, 3,000 cities. And it shouldn't be different in each city, right? It should be some consistency across the board. So this isn't a matter of, oh, you should deregulate. It's make it simple so that we know how to comply.
We're getting to the end of the panel, but I want to give you all one specific question, and I will start with you, Sergey. Are you confident that there will be a deal on the AI Omnibus tomorrow evening, and will it be with an exemption for machinery, yes or no?
I don't know. I mean, there's negotiations. I cannot. I don't have a bowl, like a glass bowl where I can look into. All I know is to echo what the colleague from Uber said. It's more than just this deal. It's about also homework for this commission, giving guidelines that are still outstanding. In January, the Commission promised guidelines on high risk implementation. They're still not there. There is no report on the ban on Article 5, which was also promised and which the Commission is supposed to do. So there is a lot of homework outstanding, and there is this strategic overarching outlook which is still missing. I hope very much that will give us a push in that direction, and I'm happy to work with the Commission and with the Member States to do that. Without a strategy, without some courageous ways of implementing regulation, we will not be able to be where we should be.
Okay, clearing the bottlenecks and having that strategic outlook. Minister, are you confident that we still are on track to adopt the AI Omnibus before August and make sure that there is no legal uncertainty for companies?
I believe there is still a room for that. I hope that tomorrow it will be solved. And this is the homework for everyone, for the Commission, for Member States, and for the Parliament, to be more flexible in the future Omnibus and other files, because new technology regulations demand more and more flexibility.
Sean, if we meet again in 1 year maybe, do you think that the whole interplay between GDPR, AI Act and the Platform Work Directive, will that be a much more clearer picture for you?
You know, I joke that we swapped locations, but I have not entered into EU politics, so I can't say with any certainty, but I really do hope so. I think that obviously I can see that the conversation is robust and they're working very hard to do that, but it's absolutely welcome and needed.
Ichacho, to close off, if we look at the digital omnibus and especially the definition on personal data, there was already a lot of pushback from the countries. Do you expect the same to emerge in the Parliament?
Yeah, for sure. I think we've seen some red lines that the Council has understood. The EDPS had already, made that very clear. There's some things like the definition of personal data that are not targeted amendments, but there's many other things in which the Commission has said this is just political signaling. What do you need political signaling in a law that is supposed to be protecting fundamental rights, such as, AI? Legitimate interest for AI training, which was already in the GDPR. So there's many things that we should just get rid of, and if they need to be debated somewhere, this is the digital fitness check. Thanks so much, Sergey. There's already a procedure that follows all of the rules that the European Union institutions have agreed upon with the better regulation guidelines, impact assessment, evidence. Please, we don't have any kind of evidence to actually defend the digital omnibus. So let's trust that. And the few things that are actual simplification, I already mentioned some of them, but I'm happy to discuss that afterwards, can be kept. But these are 3-4 things, and really, we cannot be setting a precedent, because this move fast and break things approach, we cannot afford the luxury to make mistakes when it comes to regulating fundamental rights, which are already being violated. So let's focus on enforcement, and more level playing field for companies all across the board, more rights for citizens and for people in the European Union, and less deregulation, because this is not benefiting anybody except for this strategy that the Commission has had that is not actually working even for the other co-legislators.
I hear less deregulation, but I heard someone earlier saying more deregulation, so I think that's a good way to close off this panel. We're not entirely on the same page on that. The main takeaway is, I think, that we have good hopes for an AI omnibus deal tomorrow, maybe or maybe not with machinery, let's see, and that we that there was also a plea to focus more on enforcement, on simplifying and harmonizing enforcement rather than just focusing on simplifying the rule books. I want to thank you all for attending, and thank especially Sergey for waking up so early. I would say go back to your bed after this. So thanks all for being here, for my panelists. Up next, we will have an executive interview from our leading partner, Accenture, with Mauro Macchi, the CEO for the EMEA region, and Samantha Garrett, Pareto. So please stay seated. Thank you very much.